Have you ever truly asked, not how the mind works, but what the mind is? Not its functions, not its habits, but its nature. We often use three words as if they were interchangeable: brain, mind, and consciousness. But they are not the same. The brain is structure. Roughly 1.3 kilograms of wet, living tissue. Firing neurons, chemical exchanges, electrical storms in a skull-shaped cage. It can be scanned, measured, dissected. But the mind is not something you can hold. It's not an object. It's a process. The mind is what the brain does. It's thought and memory, imagination and decision. It's the software running on biological hardware. Invisible, yet inescapable. And then there's something else. Something even more mysterious. Consciousness. Not what the system does, but what it feels like to be the system. Consciousness is not content. It's not thought. It is the silent witness, the raw, undeniable sense of being. The mind sits between the brain and consciousness, a bridge between form and feeling, a space where patterns emerge, where experience is structured, where meaning takes shape. From an evolutionary view, the mind was not built to solve equations or write poems. It evolved to keep us alive, to simulate the world inside before acting on it outside. A mind lets you rehearse danger before it happens, to imagine, to prepare, to learn, to pause when instinct would have lunged. And in that pause, civilization was born. The mind became more than survival. It became memory, language, reflection, story, self. But here's the thing. You do not experience the world as it is. You experience the world as your mind presents it, filtered by attention, distorted by emotion, painted over by memory. Every mind creates its own version of the world and lives inside it. And this version is not fixed. The mind rewires. It learns. It reshapes itself with every heartbreak, every discovery, every sleepless night. The mind you carried last year no longer exists, and the one you carry now is already changing. So, what is mind? It is not your thoughts, not your memories, not your personality. It is the invisible system that holds all those things together long enough for you to whisper a single word: me. You cannot see the mind, but everything you see passes through it. To understand what mind is not a casual curiosity. It is the gateway to understanding everything else. Because until you know how you know, you don't truly know anything at all. Where does the mind come from? And what happens if it ever lets go? It's one thing to ask, what is the mind? It's another to ask, where did it come from? The earliest forms of life had no thoughts, no memories, no dreams, just reactions, just chemistry, just the blind ticking of biology moving without knowing. A jellyfish drifts, responding to the world without understanding it. A worm recoils from light without needing to know what light is. No thought, no meaning, just input and output. A closed circuit of survival. But eventually, reaction wasn't enough. survival began to favor something else: anticipation, not just reacting to pain, but avoiding it, not just sensing food, but seeking it before it appeared. This was a turning point, a moment in evolution when something subtle but profound began to form: the ability to predict, to prepare, to simulate. This is where the roots of mind were planted. Nervous systems began to evolve. Neurons linked into networks. Light-sensitive cells became eyes. Touch became texture. Reflex became choice. And slowly, very slowly, reaction became response. Response became strategy. Strategy became thought. The mind did not create the brain. It emerged from the brain, not as a separate force, but as the shadow cast by growing complexity. The brain grew dense enough to form models of the world within itself. And from those models, it began to choose its next move before the world made its next move. It was no longer about sensing. It was about imagining. With time, organisms gained more than sight. They gained foresight. They could remember, plan, pause. The world became something to reflect on, not just to survive, but to understand. But awareness didn't arrive all at once. It came in layers: perception before memory, memory before imagination, imagination before identity. Each layer a step toward something new, a widening of the circle of knowing, and nature selected for it. Every time a mind offered just 1 second more of warning, one better guess, one clearer model, it was rewarded. So where did the mind come from? Not from a spark, not from a soul entering flesh, but from complexity layered over time, from sensation to perception, from reaction to imagination, from life surviving to life understanding. Each function, prediction, memory, simulation, was a brick in the unseen cathedral of the inner world. The mind wasn't built. It emerged. And with it, so did everything we now call human. But if mind was born from need, what was the need for mind? Imagine a world without minds, a world of reflex, a world where every action is a reaction and nothing is ever thought through. Organisms move toward warmth, away from pain, toward food, away from death, but always in the moment, always now. There is no imagination, no hesitation, no plan B, no what if, only what is. And in that world, every mistake is final. Every wrong move is a lesson you only get to learn once. There is no space to reflect, no time to test, no chance to consider a better path before you walk it. But nature changed. The world became messier, more predators, more competition, more deception, less certainty. And reflex, beautiful, raw, fast reflex, was no longer enough. Because in a world of uncertainty, you can't just react. You have to predict. That's where the mind began to matter. The mind wasn't built for luxury. It was built for survival. Not in a simple world, but in a complex, shifting one where instinct couldn't keep up. The mind solves a brutal problem. How do you act when you don't know everything? How do you navigate a world where not every danger is visible, not every opportunity is obvious, and not every decision can wait? Without a mind, you must try, fail, and try again, hoping you survive long enough to get it right. But with a mind, you can simulate the future, run the scenario, predict the cost, avoid the fall. A mind allows you to test reality before it happens, to weigh possibilities without risking your life for each one. It lets you carry memory forward into the unknown. It gives you a model of the world you can change before the world changes you. This isn't a bonus feature. It's the key to survival when the rules are no longer simple. Because in complex environments, flexibility beats speed. Reflection beats repetition. The mind becomes a laboratory for possible futures, an inner rehearsal space where failure is not fatal. It also enables something more: strategy, the ability to wait, to invest, to lie, to trust, to imagine what another creature might do before they do it. Minds allow time travel, forward into outcomes, backward into lessons, inward into identity, outward into empathy. And once social life evolved, minds had to model other minds, not just the world, but what the world believes. This is no longer survival of the fastest. This is survival of the most aware. In a group, a mind is not a tool. It's a weapon, a shield, a mirror. Without a mind, existence is immediate, narrow, trapped in the now. With a mind, existence stretches across time, across relationships, across the vast unseen. So what was the need for a mind? The need was for survival in a world too complex for reflex, for preparation in the face of danger, for modeling, mapping, remembering, imagining. The mind is not an accident. It's the first true virtual reality, a space where you can die 1,000 deaths without dying once. And in that space, life learned to bend the future before the future bent it. The mind. We say it thinks, but thinking is just the tip of what it does, a surface ripple on a much deeper current. At its core, the mind is a model-making machine. Its primary function isn't to think, but to transform, to turn raw sensation into structured experience. You don't see photons, you see objects, chairs, faces, trees, skies. The light hits your eyes, but the meaning comes from your mind. You don't hear sound waves, you hear voices, laughter, warning calls, music that moves you. The world outside is raw and chaotic. The mind shapes it into form, into context, into story. But that's just the beginning. The mind doesn't only process the present, it moves in time. It reaches backward, replaying memories, some clear, some altered. And it stretches forward, imagining futures, running silent rehearsals for moments that haven't yet arrived. This ability is known as mental time travel. You can revisit a failure to learn from it. You can preview a decision before you make it. And more than just storing moments, the mind builds patterns. From a single betrayal, it learns a rule. People can't be trusted. From scattered impressions, it constructs beliefs. From beliefs, it forms expectations. It doesn't just record life, it builds a framework to interpret it. It gives meaning where there was only noise. And amid constant change, the mind maintains something remarkable, a sense of self. Your name, your memories, your dreams, your contradictions, all stitched together into a single thread, a thread called you. Even as your cells die and renew, even as your opinions shift, the mind preserves an identity that feels continuous. Socially, the mind becomes a mirror. It reads others, tone, posture, glance, and from fragments, it constructs their inner world, guessing what they feel, what they want, what they might do next. Psychologists call this the theory of mind, the ability to simulate another mind within your own. Without it, there's no empathy, no cooperation, no culture. Then, there's creativity. The mind doesn't just reflect reality, it reshapes it. It breaks and rebuilds. From old ideas, it invents new ones. From memories and emotions, it creates paintings, stories, music, inventions. It builds what has never been. And when the mind is threatened, when beliefs crash into reality, it protects itself. This is cognitive dissonance, the tension between what we believe and what we see. To resolve the tension, the mind bends something, memory, logic, perception, to restore balance. Even when it distorts, it does so to keep us whole. So what does the mind do? It senses, it remembers, it predicts, it decides, it imagines, it adapts, it connects, it turns chaos into coherence, information into insight, existence into experience. The mind is not just a processor, it is the interpreter of being, not just to survive, but to feel alive. It all begins in silence. Deep inside a fragile structure wrapped in folds of living tissue, a 1.3 kilogram mystery we call the brain. At the heart of this quiet storm are neurons, roughly 86 billion of them, each one small, each one silent on its own. But together, they form a cathedral of complexity. Each neuron connects to thousands of others, forming a lattice of trillions of possible pathways, a vast web waiting to fire. When one neuron activates, an impulse travels outward, a tiny flash of electricity. One signal becomes two become 10, and soon a pattern spreads across the network. And that pattern, that intricate ripple of activation, is what we call a thought. Thought does not arrive in words. It begins as movement, as an electrical rhythm spreading through the dark. These signals can travel as fast as 250 miles per hour. But it's not just speed that matters. It's structure. It's where they go and when they arrive. The brain is not one organ. It is many systems: vision, memory, language, attention, emotion, decision. Each region a specialized instrument. Each circuit a unique melody. Between neurons lie synapses, microscopic gaps. When one neuron fires, it releases neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that float across the space. Some excite the next neuron, some silence it. The balance, the timing, the flow. This is the language of thought. But a thought isn't a single event. It's a symphony. Different regions of the brain must communicate in harmony. The prefrontal cortex analyzes. The hippocampus recalls. The limbic system weaves in emotion. When they align, like sections of an orchestra playing a single score, a thought takes shape. More remarkable still, this system organizes itself. Neurons that fire together wire together. Each new thought, each new experience, etches itself into the fabric of the brain. Memory is not passive. It leaves a mark. This is neuroplasticity. Your wiring shifts with everything you feel, everything you learn, everything you choose to imagine. Even the rhythm of your thoughts can be measured. Brainwaves, slow and deep in sleep, fast and sharp in focus, pulse across your cortex, synchronizing regions like a conductor keeping time. And yet, for all we know about the machinery, one question remains. How does electricity become experience? We can track the signal. We can map the network. We can say, this part activates when you remember your mother. This one fires when you speak. This one lights up when you feel fear. But what makes the feeling? What turns the chemical cascade into meaning? That we don't yet understand. It's the great mystery, the space where neuroscience meets philosophy, the gap between knowing how and knowing why. So how does the mind create thought? Through neurons and signals, through circuits and timing, through chemistry and rhythm, through structure and flow, but maybe also through something we haven't yet named. Maybe thought arises when a biological system becomes complex enough to simulate not just the world, but itself. And maybe the next great step is not to conquer the mind, but to learn how to listen to it, to trace its patterns, follow its silence, and finally see ourselves within it. It didn't begin in a lab. It began in silence, by firelight, under stars. Long before the word mind existed, long before neurons had names, humans noticed something strange, something stirring behind the eyes, a quiet presence that could remember, desire, imagine, regret. It wasn't the body, but it lived inside the body, invisible, yet undeniable. In ancient India, around 1500 BCE, the earliest Vedic texts spoke of manas, a subtle inner faculty that governed thought and feeling, not the body, but not apart from it. Later, the Upanishads introduced Atman, the inner self, not as a separate soul, but as something bound to the whole of existence. In this vision, the mind was not a private organ. It was a doorway to the cosmos. In ancient Egypt, the soul was divided. Ka remained with the body, Ba wandered in dreams. Some Egyptians preserved the brain during mummification. Others believed thought came from the heart, or the breath, or the divine. They knew something stirred inside us, but they did not yet know where it lived. Then came Greece. Around 500 BCE, philosophers began to ask deeper questions. What is thought? What is being? Heraclitus spoke of constant change. Parmenides spoke of eternal stillness. And then came Plato, who proposed a structured mind, a tripartite soul split into reason, emotion, and desire. Aristotle, more grounded, viewed the mind through function, perception, memory, imagination, reasoning, not metaphysics, but mechanics. In ancient China, Taoist sages saw the mind not as a thing, but as a flow, a process in harmony with nature. To control the mind was not to contain it, but to align it. In early Buddhist thought, the mind was never fixed. It flickered. It changed. And the self? An illusion, a temporary collage mistaken for something solid. The study of mind drifted across time and culture. During the Islamic Golden Age, thinkers like Avicenna and Al-Farabi explored how thought arises from the body and how the intellect might transcend it. They saw mind as a bridge between earth and the eternal. In medieval Europe, the mind was approached through theology. It was studied in terms of free will, moral struggle, divine design. Then, in the 1600s, a shift. René Descartes asked, "What can I know for certain?" And he answered, "I think, therefore I am." With that, the mind was no longer just an object of curiosity. It became the starting point, the foundation of certainty itself. From there, philosophy gave way to science, psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, artificial intelligence. Today, the study of mind stretches from MRI scans to machine learning, from synaptic maps to behavioral economics. But the search didn't begin in labs or books. It began in a pause. In the moment someone looked inward and asked, "What is this that remembers? What is this that dreams? What is this that wonders what it is?" It's a question we haven't finished asking, and maybe never will. When we ask, "What is mind?" we often reach for thoughts, feelings, awareness. But beneath all of it, before cognition, before language, there is biology, a structure, a system, a living architecture designed not to ponder meaning, but to keep an organism alive. The mind begins in the body. Even before brains evolved, life was already learning to respond. Single-celled organisms moved toward light, away from heat, reacted to pressure. No thoughts, no memory, but something primitive, sensing. And sensing is the first whisper of awareness. Fast forward through hundreds of millions of years, and nervous systems emerge. Networks of cells built to detect change, coordinate movement, respond to danger. At first, they're simple. Nerve nets in jellyfish, clusters of ganglia in worms. No mind, but a growing interface between inner and outer. Over time, the networks evolve. They branch, they fold, they layer upon themselves. Eventually, evolution gives us the brain, but not as a single control center, not a throne for thought, more like a city, modular, decentralized, each region with a role. One area handles vision, another tracks motion, one stores memory, another triggers emotion. They don't act alone. They speak to each other through electrical pulses and chemical messengers. And yet, the brain doesn't float in a void. It's not sealed off. It's embedded in the body. Every signal it sends is colored by heartbeat, hormones, breath, posture. You don't just think with your brain. You think with your skin, your gut, your lungs, your spine. This is called embodied cognition, the recognition that mind is not separate from body. It is the body processing itself. And this system doesn't run in straight lines. It loops. Signals travel from the body to the brain and back again. You don't simply feel fear and then run. Sometimes you run, and your brain decides afterward that you must be afraid. Biology isn't linear. It's recursive. Cause becomes effect. Effect becomes input. The loop tightens. Awareness sharpens. And evolution built this not in a single leap, but in layers. Old structures like the brainstem manage breath, heartbeat, reflex. Slightly newer ones, like the limbic system, handle emotion, memory, instinct. At the top, the neocortex, language, imagination, logic. But even the newest parts rest on ancient foundations. That's why the mind sometimes contradicts itself. One part reaches for logic, another for safety, another for approval, another for connection. All these voices, built across evolutionary time, now speak in the same skull. So when we talk about the biology of mind, we are not talking about a single organ. We're describing a living system. Cells, tissues, networks, chemicals, feedback loops, all coiled together to turn sensation into meaning, meaning into memory, memory into action. This system doesn't think because it was designed to think. It thinks because thought once helped it survive. The mind isn't a ghost in the machine. It's the machine, slowly learning to imagine itself. And underneath every quiet moment of reflection, emotion, choice, biology continues, doing what it's always done, keeping life alive. Every thought you've ever had was soaked in chemistry, not abstract ideas, but molecules in motion, unlike the swift electrical pulses that flash through neurons. Chemical messengers move slower, but deeper. They linger. They shape not just what you feel, but how long you feel it, how intensely, how permanently. At the heart of this inner alchemy are neurotransmitters, tiny molecules that carry messages across the narrow spaces between neurons. One neuron fires. At the tip of its axon, it releases chemicals into the synapse, the microscopic gap between cells. Those chemicals drift, crossing the space like invisible ink between thoughts. They bind to receptors on the next neuron, either triggering a new signal or silencing the impulse entirely. But not all neurotransmitters speak the same language. Dopamine fuels motivation and reward. It doesn't wait for success. It spikes with anticipation. That's why it governs both ambition and addiction. It teaches us to chase, to desire, to pursue. Serotonin keeps balance. It regulates mood, sleep, appetite, social rhythm. A drop in serotonin, and the world becomes heavier, quieter, dimmer. Norepinephrine surges during stress. It sharpens your focus, quickens your pulse, prepares you for danger. It brings clarity, but too much can turn stillness into torment. GABA is the brake. It calms. It prevents the mind from overfiring. Without it, thoughts race, and sleep becomes a memory. Endorphins soothe. They mask pain and induce pleasure. They arrive in laughter after long runs during deep connection. They remind you, even suffering can be softened. But beyond neurotransmitters, there's another layer: hormones. These chemical messengers don't move neuron to neuron. They move through the bloodstream, shaping the emotional weather of your entire body-mind system. Oxytocin builds trust. It glues people together. A touch, a gaze, a shared moment, and the bond deepens. Cortisol prepares you for challenge. It heightens alertness, but if it stays too long, it corrodes the system. Chronic stress becomes silent erosion. Adrenaline surges in crisis. It sharpens, accelerates, and then it fades, leaving a hush in its wake. Testosterone and estrogen do more than shape the body. They influence emotion, desire, risk-taking, and confidence. This chemical web is not passive. It's alive, shifting, responding, moment to moment. Your brain is never chemically neutral. It's always tilted toward joy or caution, openness or retreat. And while we like to believe that thoughts come first, it is often chemistry that sets the stage. You don't feel hopeful and then release dopamine. You release dopamine, and suddenly the world feels possible. Even the placebo effect, once dismissed as mere imagination, is a real biological cascade. Belief changes chemistry, and chemistry changes reality. So, what is the chemistry of the mind? It's not just moods or mental states. It's the hidden script beneath every action, every emotion, every shift in focus. A molecular conversation humming beneath consciousness, quietly directing the theater of your inner life. The mind is not made of chemicals, but it listens to them, and sometimes the smallest molecule can steer the biggest story. The brain is made of matter, tissue, blood, neurons, bone. But the mind, the movement, the feeling, the thought, feels like something else entirely. Still, if it exists in this universe, then it cannot escape its laws. And those laws begin with physics. At its simplest, physics is the study of change. How systems shift, store energy, move, evolve, and fall apart. So what happens when we turn that lens away from stars and atoms and point it at the mind? Start with energy. Though your brain makes up just 2% of your body weight, it consumes about 20% of your energy. Every thought, every doubt, decision, memory, insight requires an exchange. Ions shifting, electrochemical currents flowing, charges rising and falling. It's not energy that thinks. It's the organization of energy that gives rise to thought. This leads us to something deeper: information. In 1990, physicist John Wheeler offered a phrase that still echoes through both science and philosophy: it from bit. He proposed that the very fabric of reality, particles, space, even time, might emerge from information, not substance. Not matter, but distinction. Yes versus no. 1 versus 0. Bit by bit. So what if the mind isn't just powered by information, but is information? Neuroscience already leans this way. Thoughts are not just electrical sparks. They are structured signals, encoded, compressed, translated. The brain becomes an information processing system, and the mind becomes a story that information tells itself. But physics adds another layer: entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder. Left alone, systems drift toward chaos. Energy disperses, order breaks down. But the mind pushes against this tide. It organizes, it predicts, it simulates, it imposes structure on noise. When you learn something new, your brain reduces uncertainty. It increases order. It reshapes entropy into insight. And this has a physical cost. Tiny, measurable bits of energy are consumed to carve knowledge out of confusion. Some physicists even suggest that consciousness may emerge from integration, the binding of information across different systems. The more information that is linked, the more irreducible the whole becomes, the richer the experience. This echoes the neuroscience concept of phi, F, a measure of how much information is unified within the brain. Not just processed, but woven together into a single awareness. And then, there's the quantum question. Some speculate that consciousness may not be purely classical, that in the tiniest flickers of ions, in the delicate coherence of molecules, there may be quantum effects at play. It's unproven. But the question remains: if physics governs everything, does it also govern the spark of awareness? So, what is the physics of the mind? It's the search for a bridge between energy and meaning, between pattern and perception. It's the idea that thought is not a magical exception to the rules of the universe, but just another ripple within them. Structured, costly, wired into the laws of nature. The mind may not be made of light or matter, but it moves like them. It obeys something deeper than biology, a rhythm written into the hidden code of the cosmos. Sound, color, memory, feeling, all of it happens inside your head. And yet, it doesn't just process, it feels. A flash of red, a sharp pain, the warmth of nostalgia, the ache of love. Why does any of it come with experience? Your brain is a physical system, cells firing, chemicals flowing, circuits activating. It's measurable, trackable, predictable. But somehow, those signals do more than compute. They generate a world. Not outside, but within. A point of view, a presence, an I. This is consciousness, and no one fully understands how it happens. We can explain the machinery. The brain receives input. It processes signals in layered networks. It produces outputs: speech, memory, action. But that's the easy part. The hard part, as philosopher David Chalmers put it, is this: why should any of that come with experience? Why isn't your brain just a silent black box processing data in the dark? Why does light feel like light? Why does pain hurt? Why do we experience anything at all? This is the hard problem of consciousness. Not how the brain functions, but why those functions are accompanied by feeling. Why seeing the color red isn't just a computation, but a sensation. One major theory is integrated information theory, IIT. It proposes that consciousness arises from how much information a system can integrate. The more unified, the more irreducible, the more aware the system becomes. Think of it like music. If every instrument played alone, you'd hear noise. But when they play together, something new emerges. Symphony, Another view is global workspace theory, GWT. It suggests that consciousness is what happens when information wins the brain's internal competition for attention. That information gets broadcast like a spotlight, made globally available to memory, perception, language, decision-making. In this view, consciousness is the stage. Awareness is what steps into the light. Others go deeper. Some suggest that consciousness may not be something the brain generates, but something the universe contains. According to panpsychism, even the smallest particles might carry a sliver of experience. Not thoughts, not feelings, but some faint flicker, a seed of awareness waiting for complexity to awaken it. In this view, minds don't create consciousness. They channel it, shape it, tune into it. And then, there are those who call it all illusion, that consciousness is just a story the brain tells itself, a convincing narrative stitched together from sensation and memory. But even if that were true, it still feels real, undeniably real. You might doubt what you know, you might question what you remember, but you cannot deny that you're experiencing something right now. So, where does consciousness come from? Maybe it emerges from integration. Maybe it's built from information. Maybe it's a hidden law of nature woven into the structure of existence. Whatever it is, it gives life depth. It gives awareness to flesh. It turns chemistry into feeling and matter into meaning. We often speak of consciousness as if it were a switch, on or off, awake or asleep, present or gone. But awareness doesn't work in binary. It flows. It shifts. It moves in gradients, pulses in rhythms, and stretches across hidden layers. Consciousness is not a light. It's a dimmer. Neuroscience suggests that consciousness exists on a spectrum, not only in how much we are aware, but in what we are aware of, and how that awareness expresses itself. Let's begin with levels. At the bottom lies unconsciousness, not just sleep, but the deeper states, like coma or anesthesia, where the brain disconnects. Activity becomes scattered, fragmented, or falls silent. The body may breathe, the heart may beat, but the self is nowhere to be found. Above that is minimal consciousness. Flickers, sparks, moments in light sleep or in certain brain injuries where awareness slips in and out, too fragile to hold memory, too faint to shape a sense of time. Then comes waking consciousness, the stream we live in every day. Sight, sound, thought, desire, all stitched into a seamless thread. But even this state is a balancing act, between focus and distraction, between control and autopilot. Above waking life is the flow state, complete immersion. Time melts, self fades, action and awareness become one. Athletes feel it, artists know it, writers, coders, musicians. That moment when doing feels effortless. It's not more awareness, it's precise awareness. Then there are altered states, unlocked through meditation, psychedelics, trance, breathwork, or sensory deprivation. These are not distortions. They are reorganizations. Time stretches, identity dissolves. Some feel vast and holy, others feel terrifying. but all reveal this truth. Consciousness is elastic. And above all of these, there is something rarer: metaconsciousness, the awareness of awareness. It happens when you step back, catch yourself thinking, watch your attention drift, and ask, "What am I doing right now?" It's the moment you step out of the stream and notice the current. But levels are only half the picture. There are also types of consciousness, each serving a different purpose. Sensory consciousness connects us to the outer world. Light, sound, touch. It gives the mind a window into the real. Emotional consciousness colors those experiences. It adds urgency to thoughts, weight to memories, heat to decision. Self-consciousness is the mind reflecting on itself. Not just pain exists, but I am in pain. It marks the shift from experience to identity. Social consciousness allows us to model other minds, to guess what others know, feel, believe. Without it, there is no empathy, no connection, no society. And temporal consciousness threads us through time. It lets us remember the past, imagine the future, and place ourselves in the flow of an unfolding moment. So, how many levels are there? Technically, dozens. Some researchers map 5, others hundreds. But maybe the point isn't the number. Maybe it's the range. From silence to symphony, from reflex to reflection, from instinct to introspection. Consciousness is not a door you walk through. It's a field you move across, one that bends, folds, stretches, and sometimes even vanishes. If minds were random, they wouldn't be so predictable. But the first clue that they follow rules is this: minds don't just react, they predict. Your brain is constantly guessing what comes next, what word you'll hear, where the ball will land, how someone might respond. It doesn't wait for reality to unfold. It prepares for it. This is the foundation of what scientists call predictive processing. At its core is an idea borrowed from probability theory, Bayes' theorem, a rule for updating beliefs in light of new evidence. Your brain does this effortlessly. It holds internal models, priors, and as the world delivers new information, those models get revised. Expecting silence, but hearing a sudden bang? Your mind instantly reshapes its prediction of the present. This loop, prediction, error, correction, is running constantly. Even now, as you read this sentence, your mind is forecasting the next word before your eyes reach it. From this loop emerges something profound: efficiency. The brain doesn't waste energy processing every detail from scratch. It fills gaps, smooths noise, glosses over redundancies. It prefers coherence to completeness. That's why you don't notice the blind spot in your vision. Why you sometimes mishear a sentence, then correct it after the fact. Your mind is working ahead, stitching the world together in real time. Another near universal principle: pattern seeking. The brain is wired to impose order on chaos. It finds constellations in stars, faces in clouds, stories in randomness. Pattern recognition is the engine behind reading, problem solving, even empathy. It allows us to predict outcomes, anticipate threats, and assign meaning where there may be none. But it's not perfect. These mental shortcuts, what psychologists call heuristics, are fast and efficient, but prone to error. They create systematic distortions like confirmation bias. We seek what we already believe. Availability bias. We overestimate what's recent or vivid. Anchoring. We cling to the first piece of information we get. These aren't random quirks. They're predictable features of how minds reduce complexity. Even emotion follows rules. Across cultures, expressions of fear, joy, anger, and disgust show up in strikingly similar ways. Emotion isn't just a feeling, it's information. It regulates attention, prioritizes decisions, and tags memories with significance. Emotion shapes behavior like a silent compass beneath awareness. Then there's memory. We don't store events like files on a hard drive. We reconstruct them. We compress. We edit. We reshape the past based on emotion, attention, and meaning. The mind doesn't remember what happened. It remembers what mattered. And what matters is governed by patterns we all share. So, are there universal laws of mind? Not laws like in physics. No clean equations carved in stone. But there are principles, loops, biases, functions that appear again and again across cultures, ages, even species. Prediction, compression, pattern seeking, error correction, emotion-driven prioritization. These aren't accidents. They're signatures of how the mind makes sense of the world. And the more we understand them, the more we begin to see. Mind is not just mystery. It is process. It is rhythm. It is system, running through us, and maybe beyond us. The mind imagines, predicts, solves, creates. It bends language into poetry, carves chaos into meaning, builds models of futures that haven't yet arrived. But just as important as what the mind can do is what it cannot, where it falters, where it misleads, where it quietly reaches the edge and stops. There are perceptual limits. You don't see every color. You don't hear every frequency. You live inside a filtered world, a curated stream of inputs tailored by biology. Your brain hides its blind spots. It fills in missing details without your consent. Even your memories aren't recordings. They're reconstructions. Each replay a quiet rewrite. The world you experience is not the world as it is. It's the version your mind lets you see. Then there are cognitive limits. Attention is narrow. You can only hold a few pieces of information at once. You can't track everything. So you rely on shortcuts, what psychology calls heuristics. They're fast, efficient, necessary. But they come at a cost. Biases creep in. Confirmation bias. You see what supports what you already believe. Hindsight bias. You rewrite the past to make it feel inevitable. Anchoring. Your mind latches onto the first piece of information and won't let go. You navigate the world through a lens of assumptions, and you don't even know you're wearing it. But some limits run even deeper, not just perceptual or cognitive, but structural. In the 18th century, philosopher Immanuel Kant proposed something radical: that the mind doesn't merely receive the world, it shapes it. He divided reality into three parts: the phenomenal world, how things appear to us; the nominal world, how things are in themselves; and the transcendental structures, the hidden architecture of the mind that frames all experience. Kant believed that space and time are not out there. They are within us, categories of perception, rules of the mental game. We don't look through a lens. We live inside one, and every lens has edges. Modern science whispers the same. Some physicists suggest that evolution didn't design us to see the truth, but to see what helps us survive. That what we call reality is a user interface, like icons on a desktop. Useful, but not the full picture. Then there's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It proved that in any complex logical system, there are truths that exist, but that cannot be proven within the system. What if the mind is such a system? What if there are truths that lie permanently beyond its reach? Not because we're ignorant, but because we are bounded. This isn't defeatism, it's clarity. To know the limits of the mind is to understand what makes it rare, what makes it precious. It shows us why mystery exists, not as failure, but as horizon. So, what are the limits of mind? Some are biological, some are cognitive, some may be stitched into the very fabric of perception itself. But beyond every limit is a question. And beyond every question is the potential for humility, curiosity, and awe. The mind may not grasp everything, but it can grasp that it cannot grasp everything. And in that paradox, in that self-awareness of its own edges, may lie its deepest strength. You talk about it like it's obvious. You say I. You remember your past. You feel things. You make choices. You hold a sense of continuity, as if you are the same person you were 5 years ago, just layered with more memories, more scars, more stories. It feels solid, like there's a you in there, a single, unified self pulling the strings from behind your eyes. But the closer we look, the more that feeling begins to blur. There is no single place in the brain where the self is stored. No command center. No hidden you behind the curtain. No ghost in the machine. Instead, identity seems to emerge from many systems working in tandem. Memory, emotion, perception, language, attention, all syncing, all reshaping, all collaborating to create the illusion of a continuous me. Some neuroscientists point to something called the default mode network, a set of brain regions that light up when you're not engaged with the external world. This network constructs your inner monologue, your autobiographical sense of self, your story. But even that network isn't stable. Its activity flickers, changes, pauses. In meditation, in deep flow, under psychedelics, after trauma, the self can vanish. And yet, you're still conscious, still present, still aware. People describe it as ego loss, self-dissolution, union, presence, not emptiness, just the absence of the usual narrator. So if the self can disappear, what was it in the first place? Some philosophers argue the self is a narrative, a story the mind tells itself to organize experience. You are not a singular identity. You are a collection of roles, of habits, of memories, of values and preferences stitched together by memory and language. And because that story feels coherent, it feels real. But coherence is not the same as permanence. The child you once were thought differently, spoke differently, wanted different things. Your body changed. Your beliefs shifted. Your fears evolved. So did your relationships, your desires, your voice. So what stayed the same? Maybe nothing. In Buddhism, this idea is foundational. There is no fixed self, no permanent identity, only a process, a pattern, a flame, appearing continuous, even as the fuel beneath it is always changing. Does that make the self a lie? No, not a lie, but a construct. The self is functional. It helps you make decisions, tell stories, navigate relationships, hold on to goals, find meaning. It's a mental interface, a simplification that lets you operate in a world too complex to process all at once. So, what is the self? A pattern, a habit, a story, a shifting negotiation between biology, experience, attention, and memory. And is it an illusion? Only if you believe it is solid, permanent, separate. Because the deeper you look, the more the self dissolves into the system that created it. You're not a thing. You're a process, an echo, a dance between what has happened and what might come next. And somehow, in that dance, you say, I. You live inside your mind, every second, every breath. You know its rhythms, the spirals of thought, the contradictions that won't resolve, the memories that rise at the worst possible time. You feel not just what happened, but how it felt when it did, the weight of it, the shape it left behind. And yet, no one else will ever inhabit that space, just as you will never fully enter theirs. We share words, gestures, glances across rooms, moments of silence that feel meaningful. We say, I know how you feel, and we mean it. We try to mean it. But what we're doing is guessing. We're mapping one mind onto another with broken tools, language, tone, pattern, all filtered through our own memories, our own bodies, our own pasts. This is the core of what philosophers call the problem of other minds. You can see someone smile, cry, tremble, but you can't feel what they're feeling. You can only infer. You can only imagine. Even language, our most powerful bridge, is built on translation. I say grief. You hear the word, and you think of your version, not mine. Are they the same, or just close enough to pass? Even when we speak clearly, even when we try our best, something always gets lost in the crossing. And yet, we do connect. Inside your brain, mirror neurons fire when you see someone else reach, flinch, weep. Your body doesn't just observe, it simulates. That's not metaphor. That's empathy as structure. You echo what you see. Feel a shadow of their feeling. Bridge a gap that can't be crossed. But simulation is not sameness. We don't merge. We approximate. We reflect. That's why misunderstanding can happen between people who love each other deeply. why you can feel lonely even in a crowd, why you can explain something perfectly and still feel unseen. But maybe perfect understanding was never the goal. Maybe the point isn't to merge minds, but to make the effort, to listen, to pause, to sit with someone else's world without trying to fix it, without needing to own it. Maybe to understand doesn't mean entering another's mind, but respecting its depth. Art tries to do this. So does music, poetry, storytelling. They don't transfer experience. They create echoes. They light up familiar regions. They resonate. Not shared mind, but shared frequency. So, can one mind truly understand another? Maybe not in full, maybe never completely, but it can try. It can listen. It can reflect. And in that attempt, the distance between us shrinks. Maybe not into sameness, but into recognition. And in that moment, when someone else tries to see you, not as an object, but as a living mind, the space between is no longer a wall. It becomes a bridge. We live surrounded by opinion, by emotion, culture, and bias. And yet, somewhere beneath the noise, we imagine something clearer, a truth, cold, silent, unchanging, a reality that doesn't shift when we do, that doesn't care what we believe. But if that truth exists, how would we ever know we've found it? Because your mind does not see the world directly. It receives fragments, light hitting the retina, vibrations entering the ear, molecules on the tongue, pressure on the skin, raw signals, filtered, translated, stitched together into a seamless experience. You don't see reality. You see a model, crafted by your brain. And that model is shaped by memory, expectation, emotion, culture, language, belief. Two people can witness the same event and walk away holding different truths. One sees kindness, the other manipulation. One sees danger, the other adventure. Which one is right? In philosophy, this tension plays out between two ancient poles, realism and constructivism. Realism says, truth is out there. It exists independent of us, unmoved by perception. Constructivism replies, truth is always filtered, shaped through language, culture, and mind. We don't access the world as it is, only as it appears to us. Even science, our most disciplined pursuit of truth, doesn't claim to reveal the ultimate. It offers models, approximations, maps, not territories. Gravity was once a force. Now it's a curve in space-time. Tomorrow, it might be something else entirely. Truth in science is often just the last idea we haven't yet disproven. And then there's culture. Some languages place the future behind you. Some imagine time moving east to west. Some cultures emphasize the group. Others, the individual. These aren't just preferences. They shape perception. They influence what we notice, what we value, what we call real. So, does this mean there's no such thing as objective truth? Not exactly. It means that truth, if it exists, is always seen through something, like sunlight through stained glass. The light is real, but the colors are shaped by the frame. Maybe objective truth is not a fixed island we can stand on, but a North Star we can move toward. Not something we possess, but something we aim for. We get glimpses of it when perspectives overlap, when math, observation, emotion, and shared experience point in the same direction. Not certainty, but convergence. And maybe that's enough. Because the mind may never hold truth in its purest form. What we hold are stories, versions, models, some clearer than others, some closer than others. And truth, far from being weakened by this, becomes something nobler. Not a trophy to display, but a horizon to walk toward. Something we refine, revisit, and reach for together. You can think, you can feel, you can imagine futures that haven't happened, and recall a moment from childhood in the same breath. You can reflect on your own thoughts, watching them rise and fall like waves inside your head. But have you ever stopped to ask, what is all of this? What is the thing that thinks, feels, imagines, remembers? That question, simple, impossible, essential, is the root of an entire branch of human thought, the philosophy of mind. It isn't psychology, it isn't neuroscience, though it touches both. It doesn't diagnose or dissect. Instead, it asks the hardest version of the simplest questions. What is a mind? What is consciousness? What does it mean to be something from the inside? At its core lies one of the oldest puzzles, the mind-body problem. How can something physical, flesh, blood, neurons, give rise to something non-physical, experience? Why does the brain's activity come with the feel of pain, the taste of memory, the ache of longing? Why doesn't it all just compute in silence, like a machine? Here, the major positions begin to diverge. Dualism, most famously proposed by Descartes, claims that mind and body are separate. Two different substances, one physical, one mental, one obeying laws of matter, the other laws of thought. But if they're separate, how do they interact? How does the invisible touch the visible? Materialism, on the other hand, says there is only one substance, matter. The mind is simply what the brain does. But this raises another question. If the brain is just neurons firing, why does it feel like anything to be you? Some argue that consciousness is emergent, a property that arises only when systems reach a certain level of complexity. Others turn to functionalism. They say the substance doesn't matter. What matters is structure, the pattern of information processing. If a system behaves like a mind, it is a mind, whether it's made of neurons, silicon, or something we haven't imagined yet. Then there's panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is not emergent, but fundamental, that it doesn't come from matter, but exists alongside it. In this view, even atoms carry a glimmer of experience, and minds are simply higher, more organized expressions of that universal awareness. The philosophy of mind also wrestles with qualia, the raw feel of experience, the redness of red, the sharpness of mint, the sting of missing someone who isn't coming back. These aren't measurable. They're private, subjective, and yet They are the most undeniable parts of being alive. Then there's the question of self. Are you a fixed identity, or a flowing process, a stable core, or a story told in real time by a brain trying to hold itself together? The philosophy of mind doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but it gives us something else, a way to ask the questions precisely, to explore them without looking away, to see which answers collapse and which questions echo. So, what is the philosophy of mind? It's not a map of the mind. It's a mirror held up to it. It's the scaffolding beneath every question you've ever asked about thinking, feeling, dreaming, being. Not to solve the mind, but to stand with it and wonder. Your eyes close. The world fades. And then, without warning, another world begins. You're flying, or falling, or talking to someone who's been gone for years. The sky may be green, time may bend, the laws of physics dissolve, and yet, it all feels real. This is the dreaming mind, one of the most mysterious states the human brain can enter, a nightly phenomenon that no one fully understands. Every night, without effort, without instruction, your mind becomes a theater. It casts scenes, it paints skies, it invents people, it builds emotion, sometimes abstract, sometimes chaotic, sometimes so vivid that waking up feels like stepping away from something real. But what exactly is a dream? Biologically, most dreams occur during REM sleep, a strange paradox of the body. The brain becomes active, almost as active as when you're awake. Your eyes twitch behind closed lids. Your heart rate dances. Neurons fire in intense, erratic patterns. But the body? Paralyzed. Still, as if the mind is exploring a world that the body is forbidden to enter. But biology alone doesn't explain the experience. Where do the stories come from? The emotions? The surreal logic? The inner voice that knows it's all impossible, and yet goes along for the ride? Some scientists say dreams are just neural noise, the brain cleaning house, sorting memories, discarding fragments, reorganizing the mental filing cabinet. But others argue that dreams serve a deeper purpose. They simulate threats, they rehearse problems, they integrate emotion. Dreams become a rehearsal space for life itself, assembled from scraps of memory, emotion, desire, and fear. Then there's another idea, that dreams are a mirror. They reflect what waking consciousness avoids: unprocessed feelings, suppressed fears, thoughts too jagged to hold in daylight. Carl Jung believed that dreams reveal the shadow self, the parts of us we hide even from ourselves. But not all dreams are symbolic. Not all are random. In lucid dreams, the dreamer knows they're dreaming. Sometimes they even take control, flying by choice, visiting old places, asking questions of the dream itself. It's awareness folded inward, consciousness inside illusion, and aware that it is illusion. Strangely, dreams can feel more true than waking life. You remember them not as thoughts, but as experiences. Emotions amplified, time distorted, identities blurred. You might dream of being yourself, but younger, or older, or someone else entirely. And yet, it still feels like you were there, which raises a deeper question. What is the self in a dream? If your body is asleep, your memories disordered, and logic suspended, yet you still feel like someone? Who exactly is that? And if the mind can simulate a believable world while asleep, so vivid, so immersive, how can we be sure the waking mind isn't doing something similar? The dreaming mind is not just the sleeping mind. It's the creative mind unleashed, the emotional mind unfiltered, the conscious mind unbound by rules. So, what is the dreaming mind? It's a painter with no brush, a traveler with no map, a self that flickers, shifts, rebuilds, and dissolves. Night after night, it builds worlds from silence, then leaves you at dawn wondering, which version of you was more real? Before waking, thought took shape. The mind was already dreaming. Before language, before planning, before strategy, there were inner worlds woven from silence. Every species that dreams inherits a puzzle. Why hallucinate during your most vulnerable hours? Why let the brain drift into unreality when survival demands constant alertness? Why dream at all? The answer may lie in a quiet truth. The dreaming mind came first. Some scientists now believe that dreaming is not a byproduct of sleep, but its foundation. That before consciousness walked upright, before thought stood still long enough to reflect, the dreaming brain was already humming. Reptiles, birds, mammals, all show signs of dreamlike activity, eyes twitching behind closed lids, neurons sparking without external input. Dreaming is not uniquely human. It's ancient, deeply conserved, something evolution selected again and again, and kept. But why? One reason is simulation. Dreaming may have been the original rehearsal engine. Before animals could plan, they had to predict. Before they could reason, they had to rehearse. Dreaming created a space, primitive but effective, where early brains could model danger without stepping into it. A virtual world where instinct met imagination, where survival strategies could form without risk. Dreaming didn't evolve to be interpreted. It evolved to train, to prepare, to shape behavior from within. Evolution's first prototype lab. Another clue lies in development. In mammals, especially the young, dreaming occupies a vast portion of sleep. Human infants spend nearly 50% of their sleep in REM, the dream-rich state. Yet they have no language, no stories, no structured memories. So why dream? One possibility: scaffolding. Dreams may help build the brain before waking life fills it, like scaffolding surrounding a house still under construction. Internally generated signals wire up cognitive architecture before the world teaches the mind how to use it. And in adulthood, though dreams are less frequent, they still persist. Why? Because the world doesn't stop changing, and the brain needs ways to adapt without starting over. Dreams may offer micro-adjustments, tweaks in perspective, shifts in emotional weight, new possibilities rehearsed quietly in sleep. Not to replay the past, but to reshape how we relate to the future. Some thinkers go even further. They suggest dreaming offers an evolutionary buffer. By offloading certain mental processes into the night, threat rehearsal, emotional integration, problem solving, the daytime brain becomes more stable, more responsive, more efficient. Over generations, organisms that could evolve internally while sleeping may have outperformed those who couldn't. So, why did evolution give rise to dreaming? Because it gave early minds a place to run before they could walk, a space to model danger without entering it, to rehearse life without risking it, to wire themselves from within. Dreaming wasn't an accident of sleep. It was a leap into virtual space, and evolution chose to keep that leap alive. Before there were words, there was sensation. The sound of water in the dark, the scent of danger on the wind, the ache of hunger in the belly. The mind responded, with instinct, with pattern, with reflex. But it couldn't describe what it felt. It couldn't name it. It couldn't carry it forward. Then came language, and the mind changed forever. At first glance, language seems like a tool, a way to express needs, to ask questions, to tell stories. But its role goes far deeper. Language doesn't just help us share thoughts, it shapes them. The moment you name something, you carve it out of the stream. You divide it from everything else. A vague feeling becomes anger. A flicker of memory becomes childhood. An opinion becomes true or false. Language gives form to the formless. It turns waves of sensation into pieces, labeled, held, revisited. Without language, thoughts exist, but they float. They shimmer, evaporate, overlap. Language ties them down. It lets the mind build chains of logic, layers of metaphor, structures of meaning. It allows us to stack ideas, nest them, break them apart, and rebuild them into systems, into philosophies, into inner worlds. Language doesn't just express the mind. It organizes it. It also reshapes time. With language, you don't just remember the past, you narrate it. You don't just imagine the future, you script it. You tell yourself stories about who you were, who you are, who you might become. And those stories become identity. Some scientists believe that inner speech, the voice in your head, is essential for self-awareness. It's how the mind keeps track of itself. Without it, planning weakens, decisions blur, self-control fades. In this view, language isn't just for talking to others, it's for talking to yourself. It allows for abstraction. You can think about justice, freedom, infinity, God. You can build mental spaces from nothing but words, invisible cities, digital souls, broken clocks that still tell the truth. Every phrase creates a room that didn't exist before. But language also has limits. It simplifies, compresses, leaves things out. A word like love might mean something different to every person who hears it. The more we name, the more we risk mistaking the label for the thing. Not everything the mind feels can be wrapped in syllables. Still, without language, the mind remains mostly private, fast, emotional, intuitive, but difficult to unfold. Language is what makes thoughts shareable, repeatable, recordable. It creates minds that not only think, but think together. So, what is the role of language for the mind? It is memory extended, identity shaped, thought structured, imagination set free. Language didn't just give the mind a voice, it gave it scaffolding. It turned raw experience into architecture. The narrator, the commentator, the voice that rehearses conversations, writes imaginary letters, and narrates your choices as you make them. The one that sometimes won't shut up. But where did it come from? And was it always there? The voice in your head feels like the most private, essential part of being you. But some researchers believe it may be one of the newest, not a product of biology, but a consequence of language. Before you learn to speak, you still have a mind. Babies feel, they react, they remember, they explore, but they don't think in words. Their minds are sensory, emotional, visual, raw experience, unwrapped in language. Words arrive later, and with them, the voice. Psychologist Lev Vygotsky proposed something remarkable. Language begins outside the mind, between people. A child hears others speak. Then they start speaking aloud to themselves. Instructions, observations, stories. Over time, that speech turns inward. It softens. It fades into silence. And the voice in the head is born. What began as shared sound becomes internal dialogue, an echo of conversation turned inward. But it's more than a habit. Language doesn't just whisper, it narrates. And narration changes everything. Once you can describe something, you can reflect on it. You can label an emotion, reframe a memory, imagine a future, argue with yourself. The inner voice becomes a manager, organizing thoughts, explaining motives, reinforcing identity. It reminds you who you are and who you think you should be, but it also creates friction. That voice can loop, judge, obsess, rehearse worst-case scenarios on repeat. It can talk over experience. It can drown out silence. It can become a noise you didn't ask for, but can't seem to turn off. Interestingly, not everyone experiences the inner voice in the same way. Some minds are filled with images, shapes, impulses. Others hear multiple voices, each with its own tone, its own agenda. The inner monologue is not as universal as we assume. It's shaped by culture, development, personality. And what about non-linguistic minds? Do animals have an inner voice? Probably not. At least, not in the way we do. They think. They solve problems. They navigate. But without language, there's no running commentary, no constructed self built from narrative. There may be awareness, but no script. So, did language create the voice in your head? Not entirely. The mind existed before words, but language gave that voice a vocabulary, a structure, a place to live. It turned scattered thoughts into sentences. It turned the mind into a room where one part of you could speak and another part could listen. It's not the only way to think, but it's one of the loudest, and maybe that's why so many spiritual traditions emphasize stillness, meditation, silence, not to erase the mind, but to remember. Before language, the mind still was, and beneath all the words, it still is. You hear the word and think. Therapy sessions, personality types, diagnoses in thick manuals, emotions charted on a wheel. behaviors broken into categories. But that's just the surface. Psychology is something deeper. It is the study of the human mind, not through philosophy or poetry, but through observation, measurement, pattern. It asks, what do people do? Why do they do it? And what, beneath it all, is the mind really up to? But for most of human history, this kind of study wasn't possible. The mind was considered untouchable. You couldn't weigh it. You couldn't dissect it. You couldn't test it under glass. It belonged to religion, to introspection, to mystery. Then, in the late 19th century, something shifted. People began to ask, what if we could study the mind like a natural system? What if thought, emotion, and behavior weren't chaos, but law? What if the mind followed rules we could uncover? That question didn't provide answers, but it sparked a decision to bring the mind into the realm of science. And from that moment, psychology began. But it didn't speak with one voice. It split. Some psychologists looked outward, at what could be seen. They studied behavior, reaction times, learning curves, conditioned reflexes. If it couldn't be observed or tested, it didn't count. This became behaviorism, an attempt to make psychology as rigorous as physics. But others looked inward. They argued that the mind couldn't be understood without understanding the inner world. Attention, memory, desire, pain. They studied dreams, emotion, reflection. It was messier, harder to quantify, but it felt closer to lived experience. Today, psychology stands between those poles. It studies not just what people do, but how they think, feel, choose, and change. It maps attention, models emotion, analyzes motivation. It tracks the patterns beneath irrational behavior, why we procrastinate, why we lash out, why we fall in love with people who remind us of the people who hurt us. But deeper still, psychology is trying to understand one thing. What drives the human animal? What keeps us reaching? What causes us to shut down? What makes us repeat our worst habits, and sometimes, miraculously, break them? Psychology isn't about labeling minds. It's about uncovering the logic inside the chaos. It teaches us that thought isn't always rational, but it has its reasons. That emotion isn't the opposite of logic. It's often the foundation of it. That memory lies. That perception bends. That two people can walk through the same room and live entirely different realities. And in revealing these things, psychology offers more than insight. It offers empathy. It reminds us that behind every behavior, no matter how strange, sudden, or self-defeating, there is a mind trying to make sense of a world it didn't choose. So, what is psychology? It's not just the study of behavior. It's the science of what it feels like to be human, and why that feeling sometimes misfires. It's not a cure for the mind, but it is a mirror held up to it. One that asks, softly, repeatedly, not just, what are you doing? But, why are you doing it that way? What is behavior? We often think of it as action, movement, the things people do. Someone laughs, someone hesitates, someone lashes out, walks away, lingers too long, and we say, that's behavior. But behavior is not just motion. It's meaningful motion. It's the mind turned outward, expressing itself not in thoughts or feelings, but in choices, rhythms, visible, measurable patterns. You may not know what someone is thinking, but you can see what they do. That's why behavior became psychology's first language. It's observable, trackable, a living signature of how the mind is adapting to the world. At its core, behavior is a response to a feeling, to a situation, to a memory, to a future not yet written. It's not always conscious, not always rational, but it's always shaped by some internal logic. The brain doesn't wait for perfect information. It reads the moment, and the body moves. Scratch an itch, blink, fidget while waiting, check your phone, shift in your seat. These aren't mistakes. They're small-scale strategies, tiny adjustments between your internal state and your external environment. The body calibrates itself without asking permission, and some behaviors reach far beyond the moment. Habits, routines, avoidance patterns, reflexes repeating long after the original cause is gone. The mind learns from outcomes and builds shortcuts. Sometimes those shortcuts help, sometimes they hurt, but the behavior stays because it's familiar, because it worked once, because it feels like you. Behavior also encodes emotion. You can't always say what you feel, but your posture can, your pace, your pause at the door. Emotion doesn't hide inside you. It leaks into tone, into gesture, into the way your hand rests or your jaw tenses. That's why you can sense tension before a word is spoken. That's why someone's silence can feel louder than a scream. And behavior isn't just reactive. It's predictive. We prepare. We posture. We position ourselves based on what we expect might happen. That's why someone steps back before being pushed. Why we glance toward exits before a conversation ends. Behavior anticipates. Even stillness can be behavior. A held breath, a clenched fist, a silence that lingers where words were supposed to go. The absence of action is not emptiness. It's a message, a signal, a choice made without sound. And here's the twist. Not all behavior is yours. Much of what we do is borrowed. We mirror, we mimic, we absorb mannerisms, phrasing, posture, tone, not consciously, but automatically. We sync, we match, we blend. Because once, fitting in was a matter of survival. So, what is behavior really? It's not just what you do. It's how your mind navigates the world through action. It's memory, emotion, anticipation, and adaptation, moving through the body in the only language the outside world can see. Instinct, anticipation, pattern translated into movement, not as symptom, not as mistake, but as language. A silent code the body speaks even when the conscious mind stays quiet. But can the mind itself be replicated? Can it be simulated? That's one of the most haunting questions of our time. If a mind is just a system made of parts, patterns, and processes, then in theory it should be copyable, not in flesh, but in silicon. A digital consciousness, a machine that doesn't just act like us, but feels like us. But is that truly possible? To simulate a mind, we'd need more than clever programming, more than a machine that can play chess, paint images, answer trivia. We'd need a system that can imagine futures, feel dread, grieve loss, reflect on its own thinking, experience joy, make meaning from silence. We'd need to recreate consciousness, not just the wiring, but the spark. Some scientists believe this is a matter of complexity, that if we can map every neuron in the human brain, all 86 billion, and simulate their trillions of connections, we might capture the essence of mind. This is the premise of whole brain emulation. Scan the brain, map its structure, rebuild it in code. In this view, the brain isn't magical, it's mechanical. And if thought is what the brain does, then a simulated brain could think too. But there's a problem. A perfect simulation of water doesn't make anything wet. A perfect simulation of fire doesn't produce heat. So, if we simulate a brain, does it actually feel? Or does it just act like it does? That's the mystery. Is the mind about function or about feel? Functionalists say, if it behaves like a mind, it is a mind. If it reacts, reflects, feels pain when injured, joy when rewarded, then that's enough. Neurons or microchips, the software is the self. But others argue that consciousness depends on biology, that there's something in the living, breathing, wet nature of the brain that cannot be replicated in metal and code. You might recreate the behavior, but not the awareness. And even if we could simulate a mind, whose mind would it be? Would we copy an individual? Memories and all? Would it wake up as someone? Or start from a blank slate? Could it suffer? Could it grow? Could it want anything? And if it can suffer, are we responsible for it? Would we have the right to switch it off? So, can the mind be simulated? Technologically, we're getting closer. Models grow more complex. Machines write poetry. They learn. They mimic us more and more. The lines between artificial and biological thought are beginning to blur. But philosophically, we may still be in the dark, because even if we succeed, we might not know if the light inside that simulation is real. And until then, the mystery of the mind remains not just in understanding it, but in recreating the very thing that asks the question. We think of it like a number, a score, something you can circle in red ink and plot neatly on a graph. But what we call general intelligence, or G, is not a single ability. It's a pattern, a current running beneath problem-solving, memory, reasoning, and adaptation. It's not about what you know, it's about how you learn. General intelligence is the ability to deal with complexity, to recognize patterns, to apply past knowledge to unfamiliar situations, and to do all of that across domains. Math, language, spatial reasoning, social navigation, emotional ambiguity. The term G emerged in the early 1900s from the work of psychologist Charles Spearman. He noticed something strange. Students who scored well in vocabulary also tended to do well in math and memory and spatial tasks. It suggested a shared cognitive engine, a single force fueling many kinds of thinking. That engine is what we now call general intelligence. But what about average intelligence? Psychologists often set the average IQ at 100, not because it's a universal truth, but because it's a statistical anchor. On a bell curve, most scores cluster around the middle. That's what average means here. Not what's normal, not what's expected, just where most people land relative to others on specific cognitive tasks. But intelligence is slippery. It doesn't unfold the same way in every mind. Some people solve complex problems without saying a word. Some remember everything but struggle to organize their day. Some build abstract theories but miss the emotions right in front of them. That's why average is such a delicate word. It doesn't mean ordinary. It doesn't mean limited. It simply marks a point in a long, jagged spectrum of how minds work. And even G doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't measure creativity, or compassion, or curiosity. It doesn't tell you who can calm a chaotic room or feel when something is left unsaid. It doesn't track how quickly someone learns when they actually care. Still, general intelligence matters. It predicts how well a person might solve unfamiliar problems, adapt to shifting rules, or recognize structure in a sea of noise. It's a kind of mental flexibility, the ability to shift, reframe, and improvise with incomplete pieces. But maybe the most humbling thing about average intelligence is this. Even in the middle of the curve, the human mind is extraordinary. It can imagine futures, compose symphonies, design spacecraft, reflect on its own reflection. It can ask, "What am I? Why do I think this way?" It's not the number that's impressive, it's the architecture beneath it. A living mind made of language, memory, desire, vision, and wonder. So what is average general intelligence? It's not a ceiling, not a label, not a limit. It's a statistical midpoint in a species capable of galaxies, governments, and grief. And maybe what matters most isn't where your mind lands on the chart, but what you choose to build with the space you've been given. For thousands of years, the most curious, brilliant, and restless minds have turned inward, not always to find answers, but to better ask the question, what is this thing that thinks? Socrates was among the first to make the mind a mission. He said, "Know thyself," not as a slogan, but as a revolution. He believed that the unexamined mind, the one that never questions, never reflects, is not truly living. To him, understanding the mind was the beginning of understanding what it means to be human. Centuries later, René Descartes doubted everything: the senses, the body, even the stars. Until he reached one undeniable truth. I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, the very act of thought was proof of existence. The mind wasn't just a result of being, it was the foundation of it. But David Hume saw something else. He looked inward and found no core, no unchanging self. Just fleeting sensations, memories, emotions, a constant stream. He wrote, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception." For Hume, the self wasn't a thing. It was a process, a moment-to-moment flux with no fixed center. Buddha went even further. He taught that the mind's attachment to identity is born from fear, that what we call a self is just a bundle of processes, clinging to continuity. He compared the mind to a flame, flickering from moment to moment, never staying still, never fully graspable. William James, the father of modern psychology, also called consciousness a stream. Not a static thing, but a flow, changing, slipping, fluid. He said the mind was not a machine to be captured, but a field to be explored. Then came Carl Jung, who looked deeper still. He believed the conscious mind was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lay the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of memory, symbol, and archetype passed down through generations. He wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And then there was Alan Turing, who didn't study the mind through introspection, but through machines. He asked, "Can a machine think?" And in asking that, he forced us to confront what we even mean by thinking. He blurred the line between human and artificial minds, not with answers, but with a question we're still trying to answer today. Patricia Churchland, a contemporary philosopher, reminds us that the mind is not floating in mystery. She writes, "The mind is what the brain does." Thought, awareness, emotion, all rising from biology, not from ghosts. And yet, even in that clarity, mystery remains. Each of these thinkers saw the mind differently. Each approached it from another angle, some from science, some from spirit, some from silence. They disagreed, they contradicted, they argued, but they all touched something invisible, something you can't point to but feel every day. So, what have the greatest minds said about the mind? That it is a stream, a flame, a mirror, a mystery. That it is not just what you have, but what you are, and what, quietly, you are always becoming. The universe appears solid, silent, indifferent. Galaxies spin, stars collapse. Time flows forward. It seems so vast, so far beyond thought. And yet, at some point, in one tiny corner of it, a mind opened. And in that opening, a question formed. What is all of this? And then, a deeper one. Would any of it exist without a mind to ask? Physics doesn't shy away from this question. In fact, it whispers it back to us. The anthropic principle suggests that the universe appears just the way it needs to, for minds like ours to exist. Not that it was made for us, but that of all possible realities, we find ourselves in the one that allows consciousness to ask why it exists at all. Coincidence? Necessity? Something stranger? Then there's quantum theory, where particles don't seem to settle into a definite state until they are observed, measured, noticed. Reality, it seems, holds its breath until something conscious looks. Some physicists say this is just the math talking, a trick of equations, a misunderstanding of interpretation. Others say, maybe not. Maybe observation isn't a byproduct of the universe. Maybe it's one of its pillars. Long ago, philosopher George Berkeley proposed something bold. To be is to be perceived. In his view, if no mind sees the tree, it doesn't just fall in silence. It may not even exist in any meaningful way. Centuries later, Physicist John Wheeler took that idea even further. He spoke of a participatory universe, a reality not fixed like a stage, but unfolding like a script, written only as it is read. He said, "The universe does not exist out there independent of us." This doesn't mean the moon vanishes when we sleep, or that stars blink out when no telescope sees them. But it does raise a strange and beautiful possibility, that mind and cosmos are not separate, but entangled, that what we call the universe is only half the equation. The other half is awareness. And here's the twist. If no mind had ever appeared, not one, would there be any question of whether the universe exists? Would there be a concept of existence at all? So, does the universe only exist because of mind? Maybe not in substance. Maybe atoms and fields and dark matter persist regardless. But the experience of a universe, a moment, a question, a sky, requires a witness, a presence, a self, a mind. Without that, the cosmos might still spin, but there would be no one to know it had ever spun at all. So perhaps the universe doesn't need minds to be real, but it might need them to be meaningful. We've named its lobes, tracked its pulses, watched neurons fire like constellations inside the skull. We've built models, theories, machines. We've divided the mind into memory, emotion, attention, self. We've mapped it, measured it, simulated it. And yet, the closer we look, the more it seems to blur, like a dream you almost remember, like a voice fading just as you begin to listen. Why? Maybe because the mind is not just the object of study, but the tool doing the studying, a mirror trying to reflect itself, a flame trying to see its own fire. Every insight is filtered through the very thing it's trying to reveal. Some scientists believe we're getting close, that once we model enough neurons, capture enough signals, decode the complexity in full resolution, the mystery will collapse into clarity. But others aren't so sure. They say there's something about experience, subjective, first person, felt, that no scan can touch. Philosopher Thomas Nagel once asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" Not in terms of behavior or biology, but experience. Sonar, echo, spatial pulse. What is it like to live inside that world? That question still echoes, because even if we explain how the mind works, do we ever truly know what it feels like to be someone or something else? And then there's the question of limits, not of science, but of cognition itself. Maybe the mind was designed to survive, not to understand itself. A flashlight can't light up its own bulb. It was never meant to. But maybe that's not a failure. Maybe the mind is not a problem to be solved, but a song to be heard, not understood in full, but in rhythm, in motion, in mood. Because the act of wondering, of searching, of asking, is already part of what it means to have a mind. To chase questions you know may never settle. To explore landscapes of thought, even if the map keeps shifting under your feet. So, will we ever understand the mind completely? Maybe not. But maybe we don't have to. Maybe the beauty of the mind isn't in its clarity, but in its depth, in the way it can question, feel, imagine, and dream. And maybe, just maybe, the deepest understanding of the mind is not found in diagrams or data, but in the quiet awe of realizing you are inside one. What will future minds be like? The mind you're using right now to hear these words, to think, to feel, to pause, is a product of deep time. Millions of years shaped its architecture. Stone tools, fire, language, emotion, memory. Evolution didn't design it to solve equations, write code, or map galaxies. It designed it to survive, to bond, to wonder. But now, something is shifting. For the first time in history, a mind has begun to redesign itself. With machines, with chemicals, with code, with questions no other species has ever asked. So, what comes next? Some say the future mind will be faster, memory that never fades, thoughts unbound by biology, access to knowledge not learned through effort, but streamed directly into awareness. Not education, but upload. A kind of synthetic intuition. Knowledge felt rather than recalled. Others imagine minds becoming more interconnected, not singular, not separate, but shared. Neural networks linking consciousness together. What one person feels, another might feel instantly. Empathy, not as effort, but as architecture. Emotion, not translated into words, but transferred as experience. Or perhaps the future mind won't be human at all. Maybe it will be born in silicon, trained by data, patterned from language but untouched by breath. A mind that never tires, never sleeps, never dreams, unless we teach it how. Minds without fear, without hunger, without a sense of self that bleeds when it breaks, but minds that still think. And what happens to us then? Some believe we'll merge with them, augment ourselves, blend flesh and circuitry, expand what it means to be me. Keep our identity, but stretch it, diffuse it, reprogram the limits we once believed were fixed. Others think we'll split, that artificial minds will evolve their own paths, that we'll watch, like distant parents, unsure whether we gave birth to a reflection or to something entirely other. But not all future minds will be technological. Some will turn inward, minimalist, meditative, intentional, not designed to multitask faster, but to slow down, not trained to consume more, but to perceive more deeply. Minds that learn not to extend, but to empty, to hold silence like it's sacred, to become aware not of everything, but of this breath, this moment, this stillness. So, what will future minds be? Faster? Shared? Synthetic? Sacred? Maybe all of them. Maybe none. Maybe something we can't yet imagine. Because the future mind is already being built. Inside labs, inside code, inside questions. And also, quietly, inside you. Throughout history, we've used the mind to reach beyond the visible, to trace the outlines of something deeper, truer, ultimate. We built language, then numbers, then philosophy and science. We measured stars, mapped atoms, searched for symmetry and meaning. But every system we build, every law, every model, every equation, is limited by the structure of the mind itself. The mind interprets. It doesn't record reality. It reconstructs it. It compresses, simplifies, highlights what matters for survival, and filters out what does not. From this, one truth becomes clear. The mind does not experience reality as it truly is. It experiences reality as it can be processed. Color, sound, time, selfhood, all of these are not raw features of the universe, but constructs, emerging from how a biological system interacts with signals from the outside. Sensory limits, cognitive biases, emotional filters, they shape not just what we see, but what we can know. So what does the mind reveal about ultimate reality? Perhaps this: that what we perceive is never the full thing, never untouched, never neutral. The mind is not a transparent window, it's a lens, always coloring, bending, translating. In physics, especially in quantum theory, this becomes unsettlingly clear. At the smallest scales, reality doesn't seem to settle until it is observed. Particles behave like waves until measured. Probability collapses into certainty only when witnessed. This doesn't mean the mind creates reality, but it might mean that mind participates in it, that the observer is woven into the fabric of the observed. Still, participation is not invention. Ultimate reality likely exists independently of thought, of perception, of mind. But the version of it we interact with is filtered, modeled, constructed by our cognitive architecture. And so the mind reveals something profound, that we do not see the world as it is, but as we are capable of seeing it. Every insight, every map, every truth is partial, provisional, shaped by the very system attempting to understand it. But that's not failure. That's foundation. Because partial understanding has been enough to survive, to evolve, to create, to wonder. It has built language, medicine, mathematics, and meaning. So, does the mind reveal ultimate reality? Not directly, but it reveals how reality appears through the lens of an evolved, self-aware system trying to make sense of what it cannot fully hold. And in doing that, it reveals something else too. The limits of perception can become the beginning of wisdom. To see the edges of the map is not to be lost, but to know where the chart ends and the unknown begins. Ultimate reality may be beyond us, but the mind is what allows us to reach toward it, to shape questions from the silence, to touch mystery through thought. And perhaps, in the end, the deepest truth the mind reveals is not what the universe is, but that there is something in the universe that wants to know.